When World War II finally ended, millions of American veterans returned home, eager for stability, prosperity, and a chance to rebuild their lives. The GI Bill promised just that in free education, access to home ownership, and economic opportunities more generous than anything the nation had ever seen. It was a revolutionary law that basically reshaped America's middle class, creating success stories that continue to inspire. However, beneath this celebrated legacy are countless Black veterans who were promised prosperity but only faced the painful reality of discrimination and lost opportunities. So join us today while we discuss the untold story of how the GI Bill left Black servicemen behind. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. If you like audio-only episodes, you can find those episodes wherever you find your podcasts. But without further ado, let's get started. June 1944, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed into law the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, known as the GI Bill. This groundbreaking legislation aimed to recognize and reward millions of veterans returning home for World War II. Its primary purpose was to help returning servicemen smoothly transition back into civilian life. The idea behind the GI Bill was simple: to reward millions of Americans who risked their lives during World War II and ensure that returning veterans didn't encounter the same chaotic post-war conditions that they had faced during World War I. See, the GI Bill originated from political tensions during the 1920s and 1930s, sparked by conflicts between World War I veterans and the government over delayed and insufficient benefit payments, specifically post-life insurance policy payouts. Determined to prevent these problems from reoccurring, policymakers planned early into World War II for a smooth transition of millions of servicemen back into civilian life. The groundwork of the GI Bill was laid by the American Legion, which was a nationwide organization established during World War I. The Legion strongly advocated for expansive, immediate support of returning soldiers. Two key figures transformed the Legion's ambitious vision into reality: former Illinois Governor Henry Steele and former American Legion National Commander Harry W. Comrie. Steele was often called the father of the GI Bill, tirelessly rallied support and guided the bill through political challenges. And Comrie famously wrote down the original draft of the legislation at Washington's Mayflower Hotel, outlining core benefits, including educational assistance. Early on, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was initially hesitant to support broad veteran benefit programs, favoring a more targeted approach such as employment assistance. His position shifted in late 1944 when his representative Ann Rosenberg returned from conversations with American troops overseas. Rosenberg reported that servicemen expressed a strong desire for not just stable employment, but educational opportunities that had never before been envisioned. Deeply influenced by these findings, Roosevelt was firmly committed to including educational and vocational assistance in the final versions of the legislation. The resulting GI Bill became a landmark piece of bipartisan legislation, with leaders from both parties playing a central role. Under the GI Bill, World War II veterans who had served honorably for at least 90 days received unprecedented support. Benefits included low-cost home mortgages, affordable loans to start a business or a farm, and up to 1 year of employment compensation up to $20 a week. And the most significant, federally funded tuition and living expenses for high school, vocational, or college or university. So by 1948, the GI Bill accounted for an astonishing 15% of the entire federal budget, with the government spending more than $95 billion from 1944 to 1971 on veterans benefits. By the mid-50s, an incredible 7 million returning veterans had utilized their educational benefits, 2.2 had attended college or university, while 5.6 completed vocational training. In practice, the legislation represented an extraordinary investment in returning servicemen and women, making educational and economic opportunities accessible to millions of Americans. As a result, it dramatically reshaped American society by facilitating upward mobility and enabling millions of veterans and their families to join and strengthen the American middle class. However, and this is a big however, probably one of the biggest howevers I've done on this channel. However, the GI Bill had a dark side. Rooted firmly in systemic racism, despite 1 million Black veterans bravely serving their country during World War II, the promise of prosperity and opportunity offered by the GI Bill largely excluded them, reinforcing rather than reducing the economic inequalities that they would continue to face during this time. At first glance, the GI Bill looked extremely neutral. It didn't explicitly exclude Black veterans, but the bill's architect intentionally allowed states full control over the distribution of benefits, primarily to appease Southern politicians committed to segregation. Congressmen like John Rankin from Mississippi, who was a staunch segregationist, who oversaw veterans affairs, made sure that federal oversight stayed weak, and this directly placed control into the hands of state and local officials who could, and often did, discriminate against Black veterans. One of the GI Bill's most crucial provision was low-cost home loans that were guaranteed by the federal government, often requiring no down payment. This ushered millions of white veterans into middle-class suburbia, building generational wealth at a scale that had never been seen before. But loans were heavily dependent on the bank's cooperation at a local level, and the banks at the time were infamous for denying home loans to African Americans, veteran or not. For example, in the entire state of Mississippi in 1947, out of 3,200 VA-backed home loans, only 2 of them were issued to Black veterans. Similarly, in places like New York and northern New Jersey, fewer than 100 out of 67,000 GI Bill-backed mortgages went to non-white veterans. Nationally, less than 3% of the 1 million Black GIs who proudly served this nation during World War II received home ownership benefits that they had earned through their sacrifice. Additionally, housing discrimination at the time also reinforced these practices by redlining. Redlining was a financial system backed by federal institutions like the Federal Housing Administration, which labeled Black neighborhoods as too risky for investment. When federal policies intersected with local segregationist policies and banking discrimination, it resulted in a locked door against veterans. Even new suburban developments like Levittown, which was a symbol of post-war prosperity, explicitly banned African Americans through racial covenants, blocking veterans from the single greatest source of post-war wealth, home ownership. In education, too, Black veterans also encountered countless roadblocks. Yes, the GI Bill revitalized America's higher education, and many white veterans attended prestigious universities and gained vocational training, smoothly transitioning into lucrative careers. But for Black veterans, segregation meant there were fewer opportunities or choices. Southern states maintained complete racial exclusion at many universities, and in the North, universities imposed racial quotas or informal practices that drastically reduce Black applicants' acceptance rates. As the result, 95% of Black veterans using the GI Bill's educational benefits attended historically Black college or university. These institutions were also chronically underfunded and short on resources. They would find themselves with a flood of applications and were forced to turn away thousands of qualified Black veterans simply because they lacked the space and the funding. Also, when Black veterans sought employment assistance from the federal government, another benefit promised by the GI Bill, they would liberally direct it towards low-paying menial jobs rather than skilled positions afforded to white veterans. In Mississippi alone, 92% of Black soldiers sent to non-agricultural jobs by the government's employment services were relegated to unskilled labor compared to only 14% of their white counterparts. Even eligibility itself was often stacked against Black veterans. Disproportionately large numbers of them received a dishonorable or blue discharges, making them ineligible for GI benefits altogether, simply due to racism within military discipline. These discriminatory practices against Black veterans following World War II severely limited economic opportunities that continue to affect American society today. Historians estimate that Black veterans only received between 40 to 70% of the GI benefits that were afforded to white veterans. When adjusted for inflation, this disparity translates into roughly 80 to 170 $100,000 per veteran in 2025 money. These inequalities significantly contributed to the persistent wealth gap in America. Initially, Black veterans households accumulated only about 23 cents for every dollar owned by a white veteran. But over generations, rather than closing, the disparity only worsened. Descendants of Black veterans hold only 17% of the wealth for every dollar owned by a white veteran. By 1984, for instance, 70% of white veterans owned their home compared to only 40% of Black veterans. Currently, the median wealth of Black families is approximately $24,000. Just 15% of the median wealth of white families, which stands at over $188,000. Experts now view the discriminatory practices of the GI Bill as one of the largest, most significant contributors to the $11 trillion racial wealth gap here in America. Yet, despite these systemic obstacles and injustices, many veterans did leverage their limited access to educational and vocational opportunities provided to them by the GI Bill to progress socially and economically. These veterans would go on to become crucial forces behind the civil rights movement during the 1950s and 1960s, using these injustices that they had faced during their time in the service and within federal government to fuel their activism. Through their access to these benefits was unfairly restricted, these veterans pushed forward and achieved the middle-class status, and in many cases, laying the groundwork for broader social change. Today, the GI Bill refers to a flexible and evolving series of programs designed to provide educational, housing support, and vocational resources for American veterans and their families. Initially introduced as the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, the formal legislation ended in 1956, but the GI Bill's concept continues today, having undergone revisions to meet the changing needs. Ultimately, today's collection of GI Bill programs represents America's ongoing gratitude to their service members. Yet, the original GI Bill provided transformative benefits that significantly boost the education levels, increased home ownership, and paved the way for substantial economic growth. For millions of white Americans, the program served as a magic carpet to the middle class, laying the foundation for widespread prosperity in post-war America. Yet, Black veterans would see fewer opportunities under these same provisions due to systemic racism, discrimination, and exclusionary practices. Although eligible on paper, Black veterans face major obstacles in accessing education and housing assistance. Nationwide, by 1947, only 0.06% of VA guaranteed loans went to Black borrowers. And this systemic exclusion severely limited Black veterans' ability to accumulate wealth, confining them to economically disadvantaged areas. While white veterans leveraged these resources to establish generational wealth through suburban home ownership and valuable educational opportunities, the long-term consequences for African Americans remain visible even today. The average white household currently holds about 8 times the wealth of the average Black household, illustrating how historic inequalities, including the GI Bill, have directly contributed to the racial wealth gap disparities that are still present in modern-day America. Thank you. I'm your host, Country Boy. This has been One Mic Black History, and this is the story of how the GI Bill excluded Black veterans. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so on my Buy Me Coffee Patreon page in the description below. I would like to thank all my financial contributors. Without you, none of this could be possible, and I love you all. Peace.